All right, guys, it's a big day here at HF Pod. We are wrapping up our series, if you can believe it. It's happening right now, and you all are here. You're either here live or you're listening. Maybe you're listening back from 15 years from now to hear how we wrapped up this series that has been talked about for decades. But if you're just listening or watching live because you like to fuck around and be in the chat with us, we also appreciate that. So if you're in the future or you're in the present, you are in the right place. So thank you for tuning in. I guess what's first? We got so much.
First of all, I just
Today
want to say I
is.
really enjoyed that intro, RJ. That was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really liked that.
We have a
Good intro.
we have a lot to say about this tour. We have a lot to say about the series. We are, I think, gonna maybe possibly do a wrap up so we can talk more about the tour and the series next week, but we don't really know if that's happening yet because I think one of the two of you needs to tell me if you can do it or not. But we'll figure that out. And if we can't do it, it's not anyone's fault. It's just life. It is the holidays after all. We have so much. We have so many voicemails. We have so much commentary. People are so fired up about this. There are people who are sad. There are people who are happy. There are people who are feeling happy and sad at the same time. It's all going to come together here. So,
meanwhile, I'm just feeling tired.
Megan's feeling tired. Megan is coming into this with her draft attitude that she's, kind of nervous, like I don't know, and then she's going to win the episode. And everyone's gonna send us emails about how great Megan was, and Brian and I will be like, "Cool, great."
I love it. I'm gonna have to get a new shtick. I'm gonna have to get a new
12 years of doing this doesn't mean shit. Got Megan. So that's that.
That's so
what
good.
are we gonna do, Brian? Not much.
Not much, man. Just gonna talk about this tour. It's an okay tour, so
Okay. All right. Well. All right, you know what? Where should we start? Oh, I want to say, I want to give a shout out real quick. Brian and Megan, as you guys know, I play basketball very often, and there's a group that I started playing basketball with about a couple months ago, and I started talking with this guy Jeremy, and he had heard, I think, of the podcast or like vaguely, but in between the 2 weeks, 1 week to the next, he listened to our last episode, and he was like, "Wow. Sometimes I think that I listen to too much Fish, and then I listen to your podcast and realize I don't listen to enough Fish." So thank you, Jeremy, for checking us out. He also he scored all 11 points in the last game that we played last Sunday, and then now he's going somewhere on vacation that's fun for December. So Jeremy's like living the life, and appreciate you checking out the podcast.
What kind of shot does he have? Is it like a midi? Does he shoot from the arc? Is it a floater? What does he got?
Does he roll
a little bit of everything.
Really, really, really fundamental jump shot. He made, I think, three threes in that game, and then and another jump shot. It was not a lot of driving, a lot of great shots. So
Steph Curry has just ruined basketball. I'll tell you what.
Yep, exactly. Okay, so Megan knows about that. All right. Let's listen to a voicemail. Let's listen to a voicemail that's really just going to kind of like make us all feel happy about this space that we share together.
Hi guys, this is Matt. I'm a longtime listener and a second-time caller. I was the guest, episode 47. 2014, nearly 10 years ago to the day. The show I brought to discuss, $725.99. That's right, the show. You've got to release it, Kevin. And Brian, so young that I can only assume he listened to this show from this episode back in 2014. I'm just kidding.
That is so good.
But anyway, I really love your podcast. Not only are you all fish nerds like me, but I think the underrated part is you really have incredible rapport and chemistry, and you genuinely make me laugh. It's fun to listen to. But no more nice talk. I have a big bone to pick. I'm sorry, the fans are 100% correct. 1997 is definitely the best tour of all time. To me, it's clearly the tour where Fish actually learns how to jam and improvise. And really, the band has not been the same ever since. You have to read Wax Banks, Tiny Space to Move and Breathe. This is the tour where the band learned how to use space. It's the tour where the band learned to be more patient. a tour where they learned a more democratic approach to jamming, where all members equally contributed. And I think more than the funk, it's really the tour where groove became indispensable to their sound. And you can hear all of these approaches still in their jams in 2024, in 2023, and really every year since 1997. And you know what jams don't sound like in 2024? They don't sound like summer 1995. That's because they're still totally learning how to jam in 1995. And let's face it, some of it kind of sucks, and especially in the summer. And fall 95 is great, and they definitely peaked in a way, but I would argue that they're still figuring out. They were only months removed from the summer. And one thing they did figure out was to not jam like summer 95, notwithstanding some standout jams from that summer. But the jams in fall 95 were more rock than groove, and Trey was really at the center. And I would argue they were still really figuring out the approach to jamming that they really did figure it out in 1997. And if you don't believe me, just listen to what the band said in the Fish book and in many interviews, particularly in 1998 and with the release of Story of the Ghost, that they really felt like they had made such a breakthrough in their improvisation in that year. So that's why fall 97, obviously the best tour of all time. And anyway, but I still look forward to what you have to say about fall 95. I've probably talked too long, so you guys are the best. My 2 cents. Thank you.
Amazing.
Yeah, we got a lot. Do you want to just keep going through a couple more and then we'll talk? Or do you want
There's a lot to talk about there.
I know, but it's also like kind of the whole show. This whole episode is going to be this discussion, not the whole
It's
episode,
true.
but at least part of it. Hold on. Let's give Brian some. Hold on. Wait, actually, you know what? Sorry. We're not going to do that one yet. We're going to do this one. We're going to do, oh no, we have to do this one. Yep. Cool. Great.
Hello.
Good job, everybody.
HF Podhead. Anyway, how you doing? It's Brian again. I'm the nerdy guy who listens to all the drafts. Anyway, just finished listening to the number 2 slot, 1997. I was fortunate enough to see a lot of those shows. And actually, Brian Brinkman, my birthday is September 14th, 1999 was my 22nd birthday, and I was at that Boise show. And it is indeed probably my favorite show that I saw. Very, very, very lucky, very good. Anyway, I digress. Back to what I was saying about 1997. When you were saying it was the vibiest tour, there's another band right now that's kind of going through it. You can liken it to kind of what King Gizzard's doing right now. Like every night of their tour, they got better and better and better. Every minute of the show, it seems like, is an upward trajectory. That's what that was like there. And you're right, that Enraptured is a great way to put how we were feeling at the time. Yeah, love you guys. That's just my thoughts on it. I'm an HF Podhead. God damn it. I love it. All right. Bye, guys.
People
my
are
God.
really coming out of the woodwork. But there's more from this particular listener. He called back. If you can believe it. Can you believe it? I bet you can.
I can't wait.
All right. It's Brian again. Nerdy HF Podhead. I've just been thinking about what a great show you guys just did. You know, I don't know. I think that 97 show was really good. And I'm speaking to my namesake, Brian, over there. Buddy, you're kind of like my guru at this point. Like, I love where your brain goes. I love the analyticalness. Like, I'm a Virgo, man. Like I said, my birthday is 9/14. Blessed be, by the way. Don't listen to the comments, man. That's the first thing. Don't listen to those people. They are jaded vets. I'm a vet too, and I want to tell you something. Your brain is beautiful. I really, really appreciate the way you think about this band. I don't know. I've just been stewing on your words of wisdom. All of you guys. I love you guys so much. You do such a good job, and yeah, it's nerdy as hell, but so are we as a group, you know? I don't know. It's I just wanted to say that, man. Brian, I think you're right on, brother. Keep it up. You got a great name. I love it. I don't know why, but I do. Anyway, Brian Nerdy, HF Podhead out.
This is your biggest fan.
I know, it's really
my God.
amazing. So, okay, we have a couple more, but I'll pause there.
Wait,
took
can
all
we-
this
can we
time.
please-
We had to find one.
Can we please change Brian's name to Brian Beautiful Brain Bringer?
Yes. Oh
It's
my
amazing.
God,
That
it's
was
so
so
great.
nice.
So nice.
Mhm.
Nobody's calling in talking about our beautiful brains, Megan.
No,
Tell you
thank
that
God.
much.
Oh wow. Maybe next year.
Brian, do you have any response to anything that you've heard thus far?
Nothing makes me more comfortable than public praise. I'll tell you what. It is. It's my favorite thing in the world. No. So I've been thinking a lot about this debate that I think we're going to have during this episode, and I think it's a worthy debate to have. I think it is perhaps the debate to have within fish history, because and I'll just set the caveat here for all of the non-rankers out there in the world, lists are fun. There is no such thing as best. There is no such thing as greatest. This is all subjective. We are having a subjective conversation here. But I do think that like there are two pathways that this band takes based on what happens in 1995 and specifically towards the latter end of the fall versus what happened after and what they decided to do with the level that they'd reached. And I think it is the most fascinating aspect about their overall history, their overall creative trajectory. I feel really confident in my belief of where this tour falls for reasons that I will be sharing throughout this episode. I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts as well. I know that Meg is in the vibey corner. Usually she loves the groove. She loves the funk. However, she did select this tour as number one.
Good way to get that out there.
RJ,
That's really great.
just setting the table here.
Just throw people under the bus,
I
preemptively,
know.
just in case.
I have a
Art-
defense prepared for that as well, just FYI.
RJ knows more about this band than anyone I know and has a way of speaking about this band that when I hear it, I'm like, okay, yeah, that is the feeling. That is the consensus belief, just the way that you speak about them. And so I think that we're going to have a really engaging conversation here. I think that to the first caller, his reasons for why 97 is better than 95 are not necessarily wrong in any sort of way. I hope to be able to build a case today that showcases why we have put Fall 95 as the number one tour of all time, without any respect to 1997. So that's where I feel right now. I want to thank my brethren Brian for the love and the praise, even though I was sitting here squirming in my seat the whole time.
Do you guys want to hear a little bit more from our callers about Fall 97 and Fall 95, and then we'll get into our conversation, or do you want to start and then interject later?
I'm going to let you decide. My thought would be we should get rolling with some of our thoughts and then have the callers interject. But unless you think that there's more foundation to set here,
No, I think we can.
You wanted to give us more context. I'm down with it.
No, I think we can put these in a little bit later. Okay, I'm gonna just come in with my hot take here. Are you guys ready?
Let's do it. Let's go.
I think the crazy thing about this project is that it basically made us, or it made me at least, think about this band and the music in a total different way than I've ever thought about them before, including like, when I first heard these tours. I mean, it's really changed the way that I hear the band, and it's a really, it's a unique project because we're going through here and we're listening to large tours and trying to listen to as much of them as we can in a small amount of time. And it's just kind of it's a different way of thinking about this music, and that's what's really fun about it. But so this take that I have is not based on Fall 97 versus Fall 95 or what should be ranked number one or number two, because I don't really care, and I really don't care. Maybe I should care for like the clicks, but but I just think this has just given me such a different perspective on this tour and all the tours.
Carrying more might win you more drafts. Let's just put that out there, okay?
That's true.
I also just before you speak, I do just have to note that you, who criticized me 3 weeks ago for setting the table before a hot take, is doing the exact same thing
I know.
right now.
I
So
learned from you.
it's really hard to come out with just a hot
Exactly.
take when there's a microphone in front of you. We all know this.
My takeaway from listening this weekend, this is going to be so great. I think that this tour is one of the biggest instances of unintentional gaslighting in fish history. I think that like you get tape collecting and trading. Think about 95, tape collecting and trading, stories of people on tour, the age of fans that were coming to fish at the time, technology, the internet starting to be like a daily interaction in our lives, watching these set lists come in as people are on tour. There's so many college kids and just out of college people who are discovering this band for the first time. There's stories, fish.net's being built. There's Andy Gadiel, of course. And there's just this like cultural phenomenon within the fish community that so many people and so many fans experienced all this stuff together at this time that it became something like that was unimpeachable in any way, which I think is like, it's still like one of the best tours. There's no question. But I think if you listen to these 25 tours in full and then you look back, it changes your perspective. So Brian knows this better than anyone. History is written by the winners, And so, but the winners in this case are all the fish fans who are becoming fish fans and becoming like obsessed with fish and becoming fish evangelists at this time around this tour. And we're still seeing the legacy. I mean, I look at the jam charts for this tour and this tour is great. We'll talk about why it's so great. But when you look at the jam charts and you look at there's like a, 8-minute theme from the bottom. And it's like, the description is like, this band is just too good. And you're like, I mean, come on, we're talking about like
must hear version.
Must hear. There's so much must hear. And I just feel like it is about this like time in history when the internet and the age of the band and the age of the fans and all the tape trading and all this stuff kind of like came together and like kind of peaked like in this tour, and everything else was kind of after Fall 95. And I'm not talking about the music at all. I'm just talking about like the culture of fish and how it built to this point. And now it's like built up into this mountain that there's no way to knock it down. There's no way to refute it. It's just like Fall 95 is the best. And that's because we said so. So I think it's an interesting, I would not have thought about that if we didn't do this project and we didn't end with this tour. So that's my hot take for now.
Yeah, it's really interesting. First of all, I think that's incredible analysis because it's the only kind of analysis you would come to after doing a project like this. Like you would never get that if you didn't do it like this. I think comparing different eras of the band back to back like this in such a short amount of time really does give you this ability to compare them in a way that's truly unique. And I agree with that. I think what is so interesting to me is that this tour is so huge. It's 54 shows, and they are not the best 54 consecutive shows in fish history, not even close. And so it's like there's pockets of this tour, like I would say if you said December 95, that if you isolated that's probably definitely contending for number one. But the whole entire tour, I mean, it's like 3 months long. It's just, there's so much set list repetition. There's a real, to me, inconsistency until you hit like the middle of November, maybe the Fox, like the beginning of November. And then there's also just the jamming is very, very repetitive. Like it's some of it, there's a few examples that stand outside of that. Like you think of like the Free from 11:22 or the Down with the Thieves from 12:12. But most of the jamming is kind of in one lane. It's incredibly just takes such an incredible amount of talent to do the kind of jamming they're doing. It's the peak of their powers. Nobody's ever played as fast or as tight or as aggressively or as fast as the band does in this tour. but the jams aren't exploratory, most of them, and they're not taking you on a journey or searching, which is fine. That's not where they were at this point. But it's interesting to me because they had been earlier. Like if you look at like Fall 94, those jams are so deep and so exploratory. And that's not where they were in Fall 95, and that's fine. And they were at moments, so that's not a fair thing to say. But it's so interesting because you have this tour where they come off Fall 94 and Summer 95, really heavy jamming tours. And then you start this tour where they don't jam for like a month practically. I mean, they do, but like very, very small. And it's just a different thing. And I think they were going for a different thing, and they were like perfecting arena rock. And it was just, they were in a different space. But it's fascinating to think about like the 3 shows that I saw on this tour were in the very beginning in California. They are potentially, like, I had a great time, the most like uneventful shows I've ever seen Fish play. And they were on this tour. So there is a warm up to this tour that's pretty significant, which is fine, I think, but it does to me impact the overall flow. If you look at, there's just such a narrative arc to like Fall 97 or Fall 94 that this tour to me doesn't have as much, except in December when they really kind of, to me, come into their own and are jamming in a way that's more compelling and also more consistent.
Wow. Brian, what do you
feel
got?
feel like when like CNN invites Rick Santorum on, and he's just like sitting in the corner, and the like liberal commentators are going off, and he's just got to like sit there and be like, "Low taxes are good." So I think you both make some good arguments. I don't dispute it. I think RJ, your argument of like, I think you go a little extreme with the gaslighting standpoint. I think that you're absolutely right. People were coming of age at this point in time. The internet, all that's kind of coalescing. Fish is getting bigger at the same time. I have to imagine, I don't totally know because I was probably just out of my mom's womb at this point. This was like 10 years into my life. That there was a sense of, we have to like, almost like what you see right now with the Goose fan base, where like Jerry had just passed. There's this like, should we or should we not jump on the Fish train? Fish is getting bigger. They're playing bigger arenas. And we, the younger crew, believe that this band is capable of something really, really big. And it means a lot to our life. It could mean a lot to your life. It's how you get people saying that the Creatures from Goosemas was like the greatest thing that they've ever heard, when it's like, it's 5 minutes of good music and then Creatures. Come on, guys. So like, I certainly, I accept what you mean. And I remember like when I first got into Fish and when the Live Fish series was released, I was really disappointed that the first 6 shows did not have a Fall 97 show, because that sounded really interesting to me, that idea. And I remember going on to Fantasy Tour and people being like, if you haven't heard December 95, like, just get the fuck out of here. And, like there's a lot of truth to that. Because when I listened to that set, I was like, oh, wow, this is a very fast, like in command, like dexterous band that just knows what they're going for and is going after it. So I think while you're right, this has been pushed and this has been preached, I do think that there's a reason for that. I think, Megan, your argument of like the 54 shows, are these the best 54 shows in Fish history? That's an incredibly high bar that I don't think, like, if you broke that down across any period in the band's history, you could be like, these 54 shows all kick ass. And the comparison there to like Fall 97, we're talking about a month-long tour versus a 2.5 month-long tour. It's two different beasts.
I know, it's so hard. That's why it's a little bit hard to compare them, because we are thinking about the whole tour, right?
We are. And so to your point, I would agree with you both. I think that the West Coast and into the Midwest run feels a little bit more of a warm up than what we would have expected. I think if you expand the scope here, 3 of our top 5 tours, this Fall 94 and Summer 93, have similar aspects to them. And I think part of that is that this tour specifically is finding the band at the end of their first chapter. To me, the simplest reason why this is the number one tour of all time is that everything that they had been thinking of and dreaming of and working at and working harder than they would ever work throughout the rest of their career coalesces in this tour. The you're absolutely right. There's a lot of repetition from a set listing standpoint. At this point in time, they were using something of like a set list structure to guide
Yeah.
their shows, where you had diversity of songs. The songs were really what was driving everything. 1 to 2 jam vehicles, some Fishman songs, some fun, some gimmicks, some narration. There was a whole grab bag assortment to the Fish experience that is still being applied at this point in time. I think because of how successful this tour is, they then had to change that. They had to reinvent themselves because they had reached the peak. They'd seen the end of the road on that. I think also in this, I think goes to RJ's critiques, but to me, I see this more from a positive standpoint. This tour spends 3 or 4 weeks circling the Northeast, very similar to how Fall 97 did. But this tour does it in a way that we're doing this all for the first time. We're leading up to a New Year's Eve show at Madison Square Garden. We're playing in a lot of these arenas that we've only played in for specialty shows. Now we're playing in one-off type of situations. You hear this band in the clearest sense possible, realizing all of the goals that they set when they were 18 years old, and it's all coming true. Now, the counter to that would be there have been more peaks later in their career. There's more creative invention later in their career and reinvention. There's more exploration later in their career. And I would totally agree with that. I think that this is, to me, to make a comparison to another favorite artist of mine, this is like Bringing It All Back Home, Highway 61 revisited, Blonde on Blonde in a tour. Whereas like Fall 97, you're getting a different flavor of Fish. You're getting a different side of the band, similar to like how Blood on the Tracks gives you a different flavor of who Bob Dylan is. You get later in his career and you get these kind of like messy moments where he realizes and rediscovers the magic on like Time Out of Mind, Love and Theft, Tempest, Rough and Rowdy Ways. You get that in Fish with Summer 2003, Summer 2015, The Baker's Dozen, all the stuff that we've seen since 4.0. But all of that, as I hear, and maybe I'm wrong, very, very easily could be wrong. All of that is a response.
With that beautiful brain, no way.
No
I
way.
know, right?
Not
All of that is a response the first time. And the first time that you fully realize and achieve all of your goals. So I'll pause there. I know that that's a lot. There was some response to you guys. There were some thoughts of my own. I'm curious your guys' thoughts overall.
Well, can I just follow up on one point that Megan brought up, which I do think is like more of a mechanical thing than like.
Are you going to criticize Megan? Because like this is our opportunity to criticize Megan now.
I would like to. I don't have anything right now, but I'll think about it. One of the tours that I mentioned that this changed my perspective on a lot of tours, this project, and not all for the better, obviously, but some of them for the better. Like I think I probably came out of Fall 97 thinking like this is maybe not as good as I once thought it was. But one of the tours that I definitely came out thinking like this is way better than I gave it credit for was Summer 95, because some of those long jams that I
That's a
had
win.
Previously,
Yeah.
But some of those jams that I'd previously been like, all right, this is like 54 minutes of nonsense. I sort of came away being like, wow, this is like really much more interesting and inventive than I thought. And I think that point of like, you get these Summer 95 jams and then there's 2 months of a break. And then there's basically like 2 weeks where like they don't really jam.
It's so confusing.
I mean,
it's so weird to
go. They
go.
do jam. There are 12-minute stashes or whatever, but like what happened to those like long jams? I don't really understand it.
It's so weird to see that like my first two shows, I saw the Grand Rapids show in Fall 94, insane jamming. And then I saw Deer Creek 95, like in just a fantastic show. And then I go to see them that fall and it's just like Billy Breeze songs and Keyboard Army. And I'm like, what's happening? Like it was just so drastically different. Like the energy was so different. And it changed, but yeah, I agree.
I just don't really understand it, but I hope that Brian does.
Well, my read has always been that they kind of felt like they took things too far in the summer, and that they
Oh, that's interesting.
wanted to, and I this is just my impression of it, that they wanted to figure out a way, and this is part of the reason why I love this tour so much. They wanted to figure out a way to be as creative and as exploratory, but to do it in a manner that was less for shock value and more for
Yeah.
the pursuit of musical communication. And so I always have thought about this tour similarly to the decision post 1988 to basically abandon jamming. And from 89 through 92, there's very, very little type 2 jamming of any sort. The whole focus is the show, the variety aspect, the anything can go here, surprises, hijinks. And that to me, when they start this tour and they know when they're starting it that this all ends, this is not included in our tour here, but this all ends at Madison Square Garden on New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
And we have to be able to own that night. And RJ, I don't want to cut you off too much because I think you might still have something to say. But
No,
the one
I'm
thing
good.
I just will say, like, this is a band that is not just interested in experimentation. This is a band that is interested in experimentation at a mass level and experimenting in arenas and taking over a cultural, like, corner of American pop culture. And not a lot of bands have that much ambition, drive, and also creativity, and also that kind of focus and that like workhorse mentality to be basically a pop star level band from a financial standpoint, from a audience draw standpoint, from a communal standpoint, but also really challenging you as a listener and really blowing minds. And I think that they recognize that if they brought the Summer 95 jams into the arenas, they were not going to be playing arenas for very long. And I think it's very
Yeah.
critical to understand this band's history, knowing that they had to reach an arena status to be able to do Fall 97, to be able to play Halloween albums on a regular basis, to be able to play Big Cypress, and to have the last 25 years of their history, even with as many ups and downs as they've had. So to me, it was a critical decision to say, let's rein back the jamming and let it evolve on our terms and within our own goals, rather than just let it continue to roll.
Well, and I think that that's interesting if you think about it, because they did take so much less risk in those areas that they weren't as popular, right? In the West Coast, in the Midwest, in these venues that they weren't, sure that they would have as much. They took all the big risks when they were back in the Northeast. So it kind of tracks and makes sense that they would do that. And the argument I will say for having this tour here, because I do think that it is, when I went into this, I was convinced this was the best tour, because I was a little worried that my Fall 97 pick was basic, because that's just always been my favorite tour. And I didn't know if that was just like a plebeian thought. And I didn't know if that was as academic as maybe the beautiful brains here on the show. And so I was like, maybe I'm wrong.
I'm never going
Maybe
to live this down, am I?
Yeah, that's so great.
Maybe like, I just like, I don't know what I'm doing as much. Like maybe it is Fall 95. And also because I do believe in this like absolute peak of their powers, the first peak in that. But I will say that I do think there is an argument that this band, thinking about what they were doing, knowing that they are stepping into this role, like you just really put really well, Brian, of like becoming this next level band, and they have to perfect arena rock. They also have to figure out how to fill arenas with their sound, which is totally different. You have Fishman on this tour really growing his sound, but still remaining as complex, but you like learning how to fill those arenas. And it's just so powerful. And to hear it start outside in California, which is so different and closer to the summer. And then as they move and then they're playing all the indoor spaces in the fall, you really hear it like resounding in a way that they've owned that sound so well. And you think about how Trey was taking the mini kit, which, there's a lot of things about the mini kit, a lot of mini kit jams, but he's doing that to try to push them to be more democratic and to allow other people to step up. And you hear Paige just like filling that space consistently with like so much drama and so much lead work in jams in a way that like, hadn't been as prominent. And so I think, and also allowing Trey to do more like texture and loop work while he's on the mini kit, but which is also a little bit of a preview of what is going to come later on. And so it's just interesting that in this tour, they are perfecting one kind of thing, and maybe their jamming's a little more narrow and singular, but they are also looking towards the future in a way that I think the best jams on this, like the best tours that we've talked about, all do. Like they capture a moment in time, but they also always look towards evolution. And I think this tour does that as well.
Yeah. That last part I agree with wholeheartedly. That is, to me, the thing that makes this band the most special is that all that constant moving forward. You're always hearing them just like thinking ahead, and you get that here. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, RJ.
No, I was just going to say, I think a lot of the things that you said, Megan, I hear in Fall 94, but I mean, not the very last part about using the percussion.
Well, that's what I'm so confused about is like Fall 94, like the real like peak as far as like exploratory risk taking and jamming. The first one. Like that's what I'm thinking, because that tour blew my fucking mind when we listened to it. Like I couldn't even believe how good that tour was. And I've listened to that tour before, but it just like, it really, in this context of these tours, it really stood out. And in the same way that Fall 97 did. And I don't know, I feel almost like, does that belong? I don't know. I'm just curious if it's like, I guess we'll talk about this later about how we would restructure the top 5, but interesting. Made me think a lot about it.
I mean, that's one thing I think about. Like my preferred style of Fish and what I reach for is more in the Fall 94 vein than Fall 95 in terms of what I want out of this band. And we'll probably talk about this next week when we hopefully do a recap, but like I'll reach for Fall 94 before anything at this point in time. Like that tour completely blew my mind. I guess when I think about that tour versus this, I think that there's more on the line here, and there's more room for them to, if they don't play this tour the way that they played, I think that their whole career looks different. I think that if they don't reach the heights that they reach by December and at the Madison Square Garden show on New Year's Eve, there is no forced reinvention, which like there's no reason to push themselves to 97, which I think the first caller we listened to, he's absolutely right. You hear Fall 97 still to this day in a way that you don't hear Fall 95. I would personally think of that as a slight critique of Fall 97, because I think that like the discovery of funk by Fish and how it works in jam bands or in their jamming has seeped into larger jam band culture in a way that I wish more 94 and 95 would, because it is a bit of an easier jamming approach that feels good. Whereas this Summer 95, Fall 94 feels a bit noisier, a little bit more abrasive than what they would later discover.
Well, and it's way harder to do. Like this is like playing this fast and this perfect and this tight is really fucking hard. Like, I don't know if they could do that. Like, this is just, it takes such a level of virtuosity that it's like, it's hard to mimic. Whereas, the groove is not as hard to mimic.
There's a lot of really good comments here about the Who
and
about Quadrophenia that we should definitely shout out. That I don't know if I guess no, I'm about to say that I should shut up. This and Remain in Light are the 2 Halloween albums that I hear sonically have the biggest impact on the band going forward.
Yeah.
I think, I wonder what's the, I'm just trying to figure out what's the argument here, just because of the kind of full rock band, more song focus, that was what they were thinking about, or the Who cover helped push that forward.
Like fill a big arena, like that be like driving and percussive and like
and
going
thematic.
towards one way.
I think because I don't think you get those great Fall 97 jams that ultimately have space and are expansive without the band learning how to jam within like a melody. We talked about this a lot in August 93, that like the great jams from that month, you'd have an idea and then another idea and then another idea and then another idea. And then by the fall of 94, those jams are so stretched out and there's not a ton of like, there's not as much idea as there is like, let's get as far away and stay connected as possible. And here it's kind of bringing everything back together and saying a great jam doesn't have to be 40 minutes long. It could be 15 minutes long, as long as within that jam we are fully connected and fully on the same page at the same time, which is something that they would really apply in 2012, 13, 14, 15, which is, I think, part of why a lot of tours from that era were in our list as well. That kind of hive mind approach where it doesn't take a lot of time and they just jump into it and they find an idea and run with it. You get that a lot on this tour as well.
Okay, so we gotta go. We gotta keep going. There's so much to talk about.
We
We
gotta
do
get
have
in.
a couple more listeners who were talking about praise for Fall 95 and comparing Fall 95 and Fall 97, but we might have to hold off on those just because we have so much to talk about. Let's talk about. Did we find out why they didn't jam for a while? I guess we did. Okay, well let's
I think
move.
so.
Can I just quickly? I think that is a false. That is not true. There's a great. I'm
We're just
trying to
wondering why
find
they
it
didn't
here.
jam. That's all.
EV dude, one of our smartest commentators, shouting out 1011, 1014, 107 as well. I will fully acknowledge with you guys there are a lower quantity of jams between September 27th and Halloween, but I just will submit the 927 Hood, the 10.5 Bowie, the 10.6 Tweezer, the 10.11 Mike's Groove, the 10.14 Stash Catapult, and Yem, the 10.17 Jam. That's a 32-minute long improvisational jam with Medeski, Martin, and Wood. Curious if you got around to that. Was that expansive enough for you guys? The 10.19 Mike's Groove, 10.22 Tweezer into Makasupa, the 10.24 Yem and Antelope, 10.25 Mike's into Breathe, 10.27 Bowie, and the 10.31 Yem, which Meg picked for her winning draft. Those jams, that's
So
a lot
far.
of jamming in 4 weeks period in time. Those are some great
Yeah.
jams to be listening to.
They're great. And I have some of those on my list. And one of those is one of my favorite jams on this tour. But they're scattered out through like 2 months. So I'm
I
just
just
saying.
listened. That's 1 month.
Okay.
Because once
1
you get to
month.
November, it is a night to night thing. It is a
Okay,
nightly thing.
Can I just tell you the jam chart
Well,
ratio for this tour really quickly? I'm not
Uh-oh.
going to
Yes, you can. Yeah,
Not to
that-
get
that-
ratioed.
It's 3.12. It's the lowest in our top 5. It might be the lowest in the entire series.
That's crazy.
3.12. And there's a lot of shows, but you know, they're playing a lot. There's only 169 jam chart entries for this whole entire tour. So I'm just saying that. And the other one that's closest is Fall 94, but that's like 3.7 or something. But those jams are fucking huge. They're like 45 minutes. So it's different. These are like 15-minute jams on here. There's like 8-minute jams, like RJ said. There's like Timber at like 7 minutes, and it's a jam on this chart. So I'm just
That's
saying, this is
If I've learned anything from this series, it's that the .NET jam charts needs to be culled.
Yeah.
It needs to be revised.
truly.
Like we need to submit some new like limitations and
Criteria.
some rules to the jam charts. And I also just learned that size really does matter. Okay. So just
Well, okay, let's just go back to this quickly because first of all, we already got all of Brian's highlights for this episode, which is great. Thank you, Brian,
Right?
for running
No,
through
those
those.
are really
That's
the first fucking week.
awesome. Okay. In terms of the .NET stuff, which we don't have to go through in detail after this, but for Fall 97, we got 15 shows in the top 250 rated. Fall 95 has 8, which I think is really interesting just for comparisons purposes. But there's also, I think, in the first
hold on.
40
Can you say that again? Fall
Yeah,
97 has 15 shows.
that are in the
released?
top 250 rated on fish.net.
Okay.
So
and
the top
Fall 95
250
has
rated
only 8.
has only 8. There's a lot of they're like all the holiday, shows. Well, for both are, but
Yeah,
just
yeah.
for these tours. Also,
I think that negates
besides-
your initial argument when we started this episode. I think that proves that the gaslighting comes from the Fall 97 group. But go on.
there's no because that's the actual truth.
That shit is actually good.
Yeah. That's
you
how
literally
gaslighting
put
works.
on those
Don't worry.
shows. You do not
the
want to
truth.
turn off those Fall 97 shows. You just turn off these. You put on. You're like, yeah, I could probably skip this My Soul. I could probably skip this. 100th time they're playing this song. Like there's a lot. This is a
Can
highlight
I light
tour.
this lantern with everything you guys are saying? Because my God.
Okay, so the other point I just want to mention, you mentioned that jam with Medeski Martin Wood, which is awesome, and I want to talk about that more. in the first 35 shows of this tour, there is one 20-minute jam that's not You Enjoy Myself. So I think like if you're, because I think that's the thing about like people who criticize
Size
current
matters,
Fish.
Brian, right?
It's like people are like, well, yeah, like they played Set Your Soul Free, and some people say that was an awesome jam, but it was only like 11 minutes. Like, bro, like where are the big jams? So we can't have it both ways. We can have it whichever way you guys want, but we can't do both.
You
Can't
can't
say
say
the jams.
Fall 95 is the best if they play short jams and then say now sucks because they're playing short jams. Like that, it doesn't work.
Well, I just think it's
Fair
like
point.
I think it's an interesting metric. But let's just talk about that State Palace Theater New Orleans jam, which did come out on Live Bait 11. As you
Mhm.
might know, we created a spreadsheet that has all the Live Bait tracks by date.
You did.
I was thinking about that keyboard army into that jam is it's interesting because Surrender to the Air came out in 96. So this is like, I mean, that's kind of what this is. But I feel sad in retrospect for the people who basically you can just hear people talking, like having conversations during this in the
Yeah.
background, which I understand. Like if you're there for a show and it's like turns into this 30-minute like open free jazz kind of thing with a vacuum solo, but it's pretty awesome. I'm glad they released it on Live Bait, but I was
Yeah.
wondering if you guys thought about the Surrender to the Air kind of crossover, and I wonder if this actually led to some of that, or they're probably already talking about it because I know he knew Medeski before this, but it reminds me a lot of that.
Yeah, it does. That like freeform nature. I think you're right in a lot of ways that like it runs kind of counter to aspects of the tour. So it's an interesting showcase of what they still could do from the summer and what freeform jamming allowed them to do. Is it the best jam of the tour? I don't think so. I think it's an interesting example of them playing without a net, no pun intended. I think it also is a showcase that, you know, if you think about the next 5 years up until the hiatus in October 2000, there's going to be this kind of push and pull between extended jamming and musical communication. And this is kind of the one side to the extreme of that. It's almost in line with what we talked about last week with the Worcester Wolfmans and the Worcester Runaway Jim, where these are jams that are kind of intentionally supposed to be challenging for you as a listener. And we're going to counter these with other jams that are a little bit more, they're still long compared to most rock show performances, but they have a little bit more accessibility and a little bit more melody associated with them that you as a listener can latch onto.
And I just want to Megan, can I just say one thing quickly before you jump in, which is that
absolutely.
I think that like opened up something, that show, because that like basically after that you start hearing more, I think, experimentation in the jams. Like the show after 1017 has that Mike's Groove, which is also on Live Bait 17.
Yeah.
And it just felt like they like Paige in particular was kind of like picking up on some of that stuff. So that feels to me like a turning point in terms of the improv of the tour. But Megan, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, I didn't have a lot. I do think it's interesting, these jams that do go really far out into kind of more exploration and searchingness. That searchingness is not a word, but more of a searching feeling to them.
We host a book podcast as well, just so you guys know.
I'm a lot more articulate on that one. Yeah, and I think that they stand out so much because they're so different from the other linear jams. And this is a really good example of that. And I think that once you start seeing that more consistently, to me, is when the tour starts to get more interesting. And it is fascinating that some of these sit-ins work in that way really successfully.
Megan, what do you have? What's a jam that you would like to talk about?
I want to talk about this whole segment from a show that I think is kind of underrated and I really loved listening back to, which is the 1022 show from Champaign. I really love the Possum, Catapult, Tweezer, Makasupa. Just that whole entire segment, is incredible. Like the Possum, I mean, to me, this is like pure power and just mastery in a set. The Possum is just beast mode from Trey, complete hose, into Catapult, which I just love the liberal use of Catapult and Kong on this tour. Like guys, just take some notes. Like, just play these songs. They're so fucking interesting and cool. Then you have like this authoritative tweezer and this incredible segue into Makasupa. And then, of course, you have a great slave in the set too. But I think this whole section to me felt like a turning point. I think the 1021 show in Lincoln and then this show to me felt like when you started to really get more flow and consistency in the sets, when they started to feel like there was a bit of a fire under their ass and they felt like they had more narrative arc to their sets in a way that started to really work. And I love this segment.
Yeah.
I think it's a great call out, and it's one of those really, really great sets from the early-ish part of the tour. I think you're right about like when I think about the way that this tour was routed, there's a lot from 927 to 1017. Let's just put that as kind of a demarcation line that are newer markets and newer venues. And even if they're not new, they're kind of like, there's a lot of these markets that they just don't go back to on a regular basis. So in some senses, they're selling themselves while starting a long tour that has a huge conclusion to it. So the chances that they're taking may not necessarily resonate, and the lack of chances that they're taking at times really speaks volumes. I think the one thing that breaks my heart about this tour is they play their one and only show in Missoula, Montana, and it's not a very good show.
It's sad.
It's a little sad for me. But I think you're right. Like by the time they turn this, like think about this. This is middle to late October and they're reaching the Midwest. We are all Midwestern kids. There is no greater time to be in the Midwest and be playing college campuses than late October. This is right when, be it your football team, Ohio State is starting to pick up steam before they inevitably lose the Michigan game and, ruins the entire season. But for the majority of the fall, you were really happy and you were really hopeful. This is when, if you love baseball, you're either being more than likely you're being devastated because that's what baseball is designed to do. If not, you're one of the only people in the country who's actually happy at that time of year. This is not an election year, so there's not like a ton of pressure happening in America right now. It just feels like vibe-wise. We talked about vibes a lot last week. This is when we're 10 days out from Halloween, and then they get a break. And then from 11/9 onwards, they play in parts of the country where they have fans who are going to come back on a regular, on a mass basis. So this whole little section here, the last 10 days of October, feels like a vibe shift, probably because it just is. Like you arrive at this point, you already have the foundation set, and now things are starting to take off.
Brian, I just wanted you to know that, this is not the criticisms of any of this is not a direct criticism of you, but I do appreciate you getting in that point about Ohio State and Michigan.
Needling you.
It's good. I mean,
it's good.
I don't know if anyone knows that before the last 4 years, Ohio State won 15 out of the previous 18 and 10 in a row. So, like this is all, I'm not sure if you guys are history people, but this is about the bigger context of the Ohio State Michigan game. But
it's a long game.
But Brian,
RJ's realizing as he's like creating this argument that I don't have a college team, so there's nothing he can actually like hurt me on here. He can just,
I just want you to know that
he goes for, I don't know if you guys are history people, like that's what's going to do it.
That's the history dig.
I just want you to know that any criticism I have of Fall 95, I don't want you to take personally.
Yeah, Brian, don't take it personally.
Okay, but we want you all to take a quick break, please. Everyone, settle down. All right. What else? What else? What other gems do we want to talk about? We have 100 shows. What do we got?
Where are we going next, Brian?
All right. I'm going to throw us into November because we have spent 50 minutes of this podcast talking about the first 3 weeks of this tour and trying to use that as an explanation of why it's not the number one tour. So let's go to November because I think you're absolutely right, Megan. December 95 is one of the great months in Phish history, but I think that there's a bit of a fallacy that it's December 95. It's actually November and December 1995. And if you think of this tour as beginning on November 9th and going through December 17th, there's a lot that like mathematically aligns it with fall of 1997 in terms of show quality, in terms of set quality, in terms of jam quality.
It does not start then, but yes, if it did, hypothetically.
It doesn't. You're absolutely right. But like this is a full month
that
of
makes
Fish
sense
at
to
their
me.
absolute peak. I want to shout out a set that has a lot of jams within it. So this is one of my specialties of how do I turn a jam into, or a set into a jam.
It is a specialty. I'm learning from you. You just see I just did it.
Friends of my thread with Mr. Ryan Storm will know that I will incorporate as many songs as possible into a segment, because sometimes a jam is more than one song. This is 11/21/95 from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. The second set reads: Simple, David Bowie, Take Me to the River, David Bowie, Glide, Umar, Mike's, Keyboard Army, Hold Your Head Up, Suspicious Minds, Hold Your Head Up, Carolina, A Day in the Life. That's a mouthful, some of you might say, but this is kind of what the band perfects in this tour, and it's really exemplified in this set to me, in the sense that you get a ton of different ideas from Fish, a ton of energy shifts, a ton of really inclusive playing, really inclusive segments, but you also get this humor and this innocence and this collegiate level pranksterdom that I, as much as I love some of those perfect 4-song sets from fall 97, I do think that a lot of them are missing this one element of Fish that is a part of what makes Fish Fish. I may not be a history person, but I did spend 6 months researching and producing a fairly decent podcast on Fish in the 1980s. And one of my takeaways from that project, RJ, I think you were a part of that. Did we do that together? I think we might have done that together.
I thought you were just I thought you were going to say, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express. Would have been much better. Sorry.
But my one of my takeaways from that was that, like, while I'm not really a humor and music guy, it is a really, really critical part of what makes Fish, and that kind of balance of lightness and darkness. And I think a set like this, 11/21/95, set 2, really showcases that they have this one foot in experimental music, as you hear in the David Bowie segment, as you hear in the Mike song that bleeds into Keyboard Army. You also have this side of them that is really invested in, playing to who they were when they were still playing at Nectar's, when they had to win all these people over. And so you're getting these two sides of Fish at the same time in a way that flows really nicely, in a way that showcases all of their strengths, is not very one note, and ultimately gives you just kind of this kind of, for lack of a better word, this kind of gumbo of everything that makes Fish Fish. And it peaks at this point in time. This is, just one night along the tour, but this set to me really showcases the band knowing what their strengths are, knowing where they need to go, and kind of fusing that all into one.
Yeah, that argument for the lack of humor in 97 is a really strong one, I think, because, and the idea that it is a bit one note, because I do hear that it does. And honestly, some of the tours that have been my absolute favorite in this series do have a very specific sound. I think of like Winter 03, like some of these tours that I just want to go back to are because they have a really specific sound. But I do think if you were thinking of like the purest form of Fish, then this tour definitely has more of that than a lot of the other tours that we're talking about, except maybe fall 94. But yeah. And that Bowie is just insane.
Oh,
that
so
it's
good.
so inspired, and that peak is so thunderous.
Yeah, it's really good. I mean, I think that's the next night. Was that the next? No, sorry. The couple shows before that, the Tweezer from 11/12 was another interesting. Like, I felt like that had these like kind of hints of the Denver Ghost from 97. It's like melodic and has more of a classic rock jam. And I got going through these. I think, Megan, you might feel the same. Brian, I'm sure you don't. But I got kind of like, I got through except for the exceptions, which like this tweezer is one of them, I got to the point where it's like, all right, Trey's on the mini kit. We're doing this again for 8 minutes. Like, what's the next thing that's going to happen?
Yeah.
But there's so many moments that are really different than that. And I think that's where like the building is happening toward those future sounds, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's like in that tweezer, there's like it's like a fuzzy tone kind of slow build and it kind of sounds like free at times. But I think that they are moving more towards, and I think that's why it's interesting to talk about like segments as opposed to just jams, because I think of like the 11-14, like Orlando, Stash, Manteca, that whole giant section with Dogface Boy and whatever. That is like 40 minutes of just some of the most edge of your seat fish that you can hear. It is just complete and utter flow. It's so interesting. It sounds completely composed. It gets dark. It's like has all this reverb. And I just think there's a sense to that there were so many moments on this tour when they really latched on to a flow that is really unique and still captures that really fast linear jamming, but it's still super interesting because they're playing with different songs. And like you think about the way that goes into Dogface Boy and how creepy it is. And it's incredible.
Yeah, I mean that's a top 5 jam all time for me.
It's
I mean, I think
incredible.
with all of these, like, you know, the tweezer you talked about from 11-12, the 11-21, 11-14, the Mike's Groove from 11-15, the 11-18 Yem, that's like 30 minutes, the parts of the 11-22 Free. When I think about these jams, just from like a defining sound standpoint, it's maximalist. There are earworms around every corner, and I think that the goal here is connectivity versus wild exploration. Um, this is where they're finding where groove and melody and space collide. They're not doing it as well as that aspect as well as they will in 1997. But you are hearing them realize mid jam in a lot of these segments. And I think a lot of it does have to do with the mini kit where Trey steps off and he plays a very simple groove and the band builds around him, and specifically Page. You're absolutely right, RJ. He shines in a lot of cases on this tour. This is where they're hearing what will be their next project. But at the same time, Meg, you made this point earlier, they're finding kind of their root within this tour is, you know, this type of sound like is firmly fitting within the overall arena rock vibe that they are encompassing, but it's also looking ahead 2 years to where they're ultimately going to go.
Yeah, you can hear that. I think there's such a relentless energy and so much percussion kind of moving these jams forward, and there's such an attack feeling to the music. But I think the swirling kind of psychedelic organ that Page brings in so much just adds such a creepiness and an eeriness, and then his piano adds that sophistication. And I think that even though the jams are really narrow and driving, they're able to build an intensity and dynamics tremendously because they're so good at tension and release. So they can use that within this like lane that they've set, and having Trey step off, because when Trey's really forward in these jams, they just become like shreddy and full of hose and just like Trey just like going insane. But when he steps back, you really get to hear something different, and it's really cool. I was reading that quote that Shapiro's like sound check notes from 12/7. And he was saying that they were talking a lot about space in these jams and saying space is the place, and they were practicing that. And that's interesting to me because I don't hear a lot of that. Like, I don't hear a ton of space. Like, maybe they're searching for that, and maybe you find that more in December. But for most of this tour, there's not a lot of searching space. It's not a spacious jam feeling. Like, that's not at all where they are. And maybe that's where they were headed. And maybe you hear more of that in December. But that was interesting. I don't know if you have thoughts on that, but I was surprised to hear that because it doesn't sound like that's what they're thinking about.
I hear it as the next step. I hear it in spots, like there's parts of the Orlando Stash that sound very spacious. There's parts of the Providence down with the Z's. the digital delay loop jam in the 12/7 Mike's Recapog. What I hear, I would even say like, utilizing, it's slightly a gimmick, but utilizing the silent jam in the 12/9 Yem.
Yeah.
I think parts of the 12/14 Haley's and NICU, it's not going to be like, the last 7 minutes of the Hampton 97 Haley's Comet is all space.
Yeah.
They're not there yet. And it's going to take a lot of work to get there. Most of 97 is them trying to really get there. So I think that there's probably a lot of fear of what silence will do to a show, and so much of these shows are about energy and momentum. But I definitely hear it. I hear it more as the future, and I hear it as like, this is the era where they talk about it a lot in the Fish book. They were coming off stage and critiquing each show and critiquing each set. So I think there's a lot of like, how do we get to that point? But you have to figure out, like, you have to build that road as you're walking on it. And so you hear it in bits and pieces. I don't think it's like the dominating aspect of the tour by any means.
RJ, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that happens a lot more at the end, like those things that you mentioned, Brian. I do think something changes like around that. I mean, post Halloween, really, like they take a 9-day break or something and then come back. And I think that's when you start to hear that more space. I mean, I think it's pretty like fair to say that post Halloween, the jams are much more interesting.
Definitely. 1,000%. 1,000%. Yeah.
But
and
I do think,
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Matt. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, I do also think that maybe it's unfair to think about space in terms of when you've been listening to all these tours where they actually get there, right? And they're so good at playing with ambient space. And so it's unfair maybe to judge this based on that and say they weren't getting there when maybe they were in moments. And it's hard to compare when you hear whole tours based on ambient space jamming.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I know we're mostly talking about November. I just want to go back to 10/21, which you did talk about in the 40 for 40 series.
Yeah.
To me, I texted you guys this, but I feel like this is when like everything kind of falls into place for this tour. Like there's the flow, the energy, the humor, the exploration. Like it's all kind of comes for me going through this first month. There's moments like we talked about, but I feel like the show is really great. I mean, it's almost flawless, and it's like you have to listen to it front to back. There's there's like, it's just good flow, good set lists, like fun. I mean, it's got everything. I really still love that show.
I mean, one thing I'd say about it is like, just looking at this set list, this is very much a 89 to 95 era Fish set list, where it is dominated by classics in really, really important places and really essential places in the show. Has a few gimmicks, first ever Tweezer reprise opener. Like, one of the arguments I feel like for this tour being number one is they could have played 10/29/95, and most sane bands would like play a show like this and say, cool, this is our show. Like in like 1972, the Rolling Stones figured out a show structure, and that is what they've played ever since. Few new songs here and there, but like you are getting the hits. Even Springsteen, to a degree, who changes up his set list, is still playing a structured Bruce Springsteen show that you heard in 1977. Like he knows what works. He knows what the fans are looking for. If Fish was not an insane band, they would have been like, this is how we should play every show for the rest of our life. Will consistently get people. What changes about them is that they then play 2 years later, 11/21, 11/22, 97, where they're totally different, and the things that work here are not working there, and they're not even interested in trying them. And I think that's like to reach this point 12 years into your career and then say, let's abandon this, says a lot about how good this actually is.
Totally. So truly.
Yeah.
That set too, the whole first set is like a perfect show. It's actually like a show in itself.
Yeah.
It's the flow is like amazing. Like if you had one big jam in that set, it would literally be the perfect show. And it's in the first set. It's fantastic.
Megan, tell me a show that you were surprised at how much you liked it more than you expected.
More than I expected. I don't know. I mean, I think the 1022 champagne show, we talked about that. That show is incredible. I think I think I'd say the Fox shows kind of stand out. I think my thought is that a Fox box set would be really great because I think that it's a kind of nice encapsulation of where the band was in that point in September. And I do think this is a turning point in the kind of tour. But you just have like really good classics played really well. You know, the first night you have like an actually good mini kit jam in Simple. You've got a gorgeous Reba, a really swirly like psychedelic theme, and a really rocking gin. And then the second night you have a great Runaway Jim, got a really strong Split Open and Melt. There's like a huge power play with the piano and that one that's just really awesome. You've got the Yem, Crossroads Yem. And then in the 11:11 Fox show, you've got the Mike Sweekapog, and then the Yamar, Fluffhead, Antelope all stand out. So I just think those three shows, I think stand alone really well together and would be a really cool box set.
Yeah, I really like the beginning of the 11:11 show, like the cars, trucks, buses into Mike's into Day in the Life is it's just a really good way to
so
start
cool,
a show.
right?
That Bowie is really good. It's actually not jam charted, if you can believe it. But it's
oh my gosh, you're right. I didn't even realize that.
Really good version. There's a lot of tension, and it feels like there's like full band communication. It's a really awesome show. I agree about the box set. I think a couple people have said that in the comments too.
Oh,
Maybe
really?
that's like our one of our viewers on YouTube says Shapiro said that there were issues with their recordings, so unlikely to be released as a box set. That's too bad.
Oh, that's really bad.
I didn't realize that, but that is that because that's on my list of like live fish releases. I think that's a masterclass in set listing. I think it shows the best aspects of the set listing on this tour across those like three very diverse shows, some jams here and there, but just a lot of energy. Like this was a band that could just, I think like 12:15 is a really great example of a show that while it doesn't 100% work overall, the first set opens with Chalk Dust, Harry Hood, Wilson, Maze, Ha Ha Ha, Suspicious Minds, Hold Your Head Up. Like say what you will, like that is a opening 40 minutes of a show that you are just like,
yes.
you know, and like doing it in the Spectrum of all places. Yeah, that's a really good call.
Brian, do you have a show that you listened to this time going through it and it stuck out to you?
So I'll be completely honest. This is the one tour that we covered this entire series that did not really surprise me. I feel very, like a religious person with fundamentalist beliefs about fall 1995. I've accepted it. I've been baptized. This is what I believe. You're going to have to like crucify me to get these me to change my mind, which I won't because I'll suffer through it all. Be crying out in the 12-14 plays like, Trey, why have you forsaken me?
I just want you to know that people can leave cults, it happens, and then they go on to have beautiful lives after. I'm just saying, you don't feel like you're stuck.
Hey man, I got one super unpopular belief that 2003 is one of the best years of Fish, and one really popular belief that fall 95 is
you gotta have
the best tour of Fish. Like I have a balance here. But the show I do want to shout out, it's been mentioned once or twice in the comments. Really glad to see that. It's 10/11/95 from Compton Terrace Amphitheater, a show Megan was at, which I'm pretty jealous of. I won't say anything more about her experience at that show, but she was there. This show for me, this is one of those, if they dropped it on Live Fish, would get either very little attention across socials or a lot of like, huh? Because if you look at the set list, I would totally agree. First set is Stash, Old Home Place, Cavern, Divided Sky, If I Could, Fog That Surrounds, Acoustic Army, Julius, Sample in a Jar. It is one of those shows where the magic really comes out of the plane, and it's a Wednesday night. The band, went from, I'm just looking at the tour routing. They played Portland, Vancouver, Spokane, Missoula in a 3-day stretch. And then they drove from Missoula down to Chandler, Arizona. And from here, they're going to do Arizona, Fort Worth, Austin, New Orleans over the next week. And then they're going to arrive in the Midwest. And this show is kind of stuck in that period. And it's just a little bit weird. It's a little bit left of center. The Stash that opens the show is really cool. The first set doesn't have the greatest flow, but somehow really works as just like a really, really solid set one. The second set, though, is where the magic's at. Possum, Gin, Mound, Mike Song, McGrupp, Weekapog, which is unfinished into Llama, Susie Greenberg, which is unfinished into Crossroads, Hello My Baby, A Day in the Life, and then a Chalk Dust Encore. This works in a way of like, if you've never heard this show, it tends to put the pieces together between the weirdness of this band over the summer and the more connected, hyper groove driven jamming that's going to happen in November and December. I think it's a really critical show overall. And like a lot of Fish shows, a lot of great Fish shows, it's just an example of like off the beaten path, man. This band can throw down stuff that like probably convinced, I don't know, 150 people to continue following this band along, while a bunch of other people just randomly saw their only Fish show ever and then moved on with their lives.
Yeah, this show, it's so funny because I always forget I was at the show because I have no memory of the show, which is so strange because I have the most vivid memories of the 3 California shows. I can tell you where I was in the venue. I can tell you what I did in the parking lot before. I can tell you what I did after. I can tell you where I slept some of those nights. And this show in Compton Terrace, I was talking to my friend who I went with, and I was like, what happened? Like, he's like, oh, we had a great time. I have zero memories of it. And I'm sad because I can't speak beautifully about it like RJ did last week about the Fall 97 shows. I can't, explain how it felt to be in the room for this. But it was a 90-minute drive up from my school at University of Arizona in Tucson. And apparently I was there, but I have no memory of it. But listening back, it's such a fantastic show. And I think you spoke about it beautifully, Brian, but the mics, like it grinds down and gets to that really swirling psychedelic shit that's so good. And to have the McGrupp in the middle of that is just, I love how they're playing with mic grooves on this tour, just putting the most random shit in the middle of it. And sometimes it hits so good and is so like interesting. And yeah, this show is great. And that Stash in the beginning is definitely worth hearing.
Yeah. There's some, I don't have anything to add. You guys all kind of covered it. What else do we want to shout out? There's more shows.
Well, we haven't really talked at all about December.
Yeah, we need to go there.
It's probably by design because it is like, what do you say about December at this point? Like I guess my question to you guys is, as in listening through this and in developing your, some would say blasphemous, I wouldn't, but controversial opinions.
Some people might say.
Some might say
about this tour. Did December sound as good to you guys listening through this? What are your thoughts coming to the end of this overall journey that we're on of that 3-week stretch from Hershey through Lake Placid?
I mean, I'll just say just on the first show of December, the Hershey show, which there's some funny banter and all that, but the Mike's has this really interesting jam that is still there's still a percussion jam, but it's more interesting. I feel like they kind of started to figure it out in December and how to didn't have to be Trey on the wood blocks for 6 minutes. It was the staccato kind of jamming in there that you hear throughout, up until Binghamton, kind of in the so I feel like they start refining that sound a little bit. And that's a great jam. That one jam is really representative of kind of if you listen to a Mike's from late September and then this one, it's pretty different approach.
Totally.
That's the sound of Fall 95 in my brain. That jam.
Yeah.
And the fact that
Yeah.
it finds itself perfectly into Weekapog, even though Weekapog's played out of key. It's just big chords, colorful, candy-coated riffs, huge bombastic drums. Like it just sounds massive, and it sounds like a band that is just like realizing in real time we are the greatest band in the universe.
Yeah, and I love the Wilson in that set. It's just they're so arrogant and powerful when they play Wilson in 95. Like this is what I always think of in my head when I think of Wilson is like a 95 Wilson where it's just like we fucking own this shit. Like it's so great. And this whole show is so awesome. And I will say, Brian, that yes, when I listened to December, I was constantly kind of awestruck at the power and the flow that they really locked into. I think of like the 12/7 Niagara Falls show. Like they're just so locked in right away. It's so tight and has this fast first set with this like emotional punch of Slave right in the middle, which somehow works. And then set two, you've got this Split Open and Melt, Reba, and then this dream of a fourth quarter with like this watery, beautifully gorgeous Slave and just a absolutely note for note perfect Coyote. I think they lock in December in a way that's just maybe you can only do when you've played 100 shows in a row like they have at this point. But there's a real dominant feeling to the December shows. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Do you guys think that this tour would, because when I was going through this, I kept noting shows I think you can't miss, and there's a lot, and then live fish release recommendations, and there's a lot. And maybe that's my bias, but I think that this tour is almost underserved in terms of official releases based on the quality of music. Do you guys think if there was more out there, I don't know, would the gaslighting be more accurate and better received, or like, because it is kind of crazy to me, like there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 December shows I think could still be released, and like 6 shows prior to that in some form that I think has a justification to be released. Like, do you guys think that we're underserved fall 95 in a sense?
It's interesting. I do think part of I don't think anything would change in terms of the fan base and all that, but I do think that some of these audience recordings are not great,
Yeah,
So, like,
absolutely.
I feel like I wish we had more. Yeah, I wish we had more of all recordings. Like the fact that there hasn't been like a live bait release of the 11/22 free.
Thank you. That
or
jam
like,
is so unbelievable, and to not hear it on archival release is really hard. There's not that much live bait at all.
or
There's
the
like
Down with
6
Disease
or
from
7.
Providence, which Brian
Yeah,
mentioned.
exactly.
Like those things not being released as soundboard, just even as individual pieces, is kind of crazy to me. But they got the right ones in terms of the official releases. Like I think the official releases kind of mark the various high points of the tour in different ways. The 12/2 one I think is just because like that tweezer is awesome. But
yeah, there's a couple like that, but I think like the Albany show from 12/9 is probably the one that hasn't been released that should be. That's like the best, highest rated show. But I also think there's shows like that 10/22 Champagne show that are just so good and are a different kind of taste than some of the other stuff. Like a lot of the ones that they have from December are very similar in the sense of like how great they are. Like the level is so high. It'd just be interesting to have some earlier stuff. And I do think that there's less of a breadth of this tour. Like it doesn't span as much, just kind of interesting. But it's also such a huge tour. But I do think that being that it's such a highly rated tour, you would think there'd be more.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we have some like 12/1 being released, 12/7 being released. I think that 12/7 being released was pretty surprising because I think that if it wasn't, would be a fairly underrated show from the overall tour. But yeah, as Evie Dude said, like we have 11/14/95 and we have 11/30/95. I would throw 11/18 and 11/21 in there. The Fox sounds like that's never going to happen, but like that box set I think should be released. I think in December, 12/5 absolutely needs to be released from Amherst, Massachusetts. If nothing else, the Bathtub Gin and the Keyboard Army and the Harry Hood, which is probably my favorite Harry Hood that's ever been played. the sound
Bold
that they get
statement.
into there is just is and the back end when it goes down and comes back up almost like the Alive One version does. It's just a really, really great show. I think 12-11 with the dog log sort of gimmickry at the start and a 23-minute really wild David Bowie in the second set. 12-15 I'm a huge fan of, and 12-17 from a tour finale standpoint. You
Definitely.
get, the show starts with this run similar to what I was talking about with the some show that we already talked about here. Set one is my friend, Poor Heart, A Day in the Life, Run Like an Antelope. You get a pause, Mango Song Tube, Stash, Lizards, Chalk Dust. Like that's a great, just high energy, high octane set one. And then in set two, you get a really, really good Harry Hood midway through the set. And then we end with a 19-minute tweezer that segues directly into Tweezer Reprise. It's just such a, you said arrogant. Like I think that's so, like, this is a band that just knows what they're capable of at this point in time, and they're ending this tour not on, oh my god, thank god we've reached the finish line, we get 2 weeks off before the holidays. It's like, no, we could keep going straight through to 12/28 if you wanted.
Totally. That tweezer too from 12-17. It's
Oh,
so fucking good. It rips. It's so intense and so driving. And then Paige's solo at the end is so patient and sophisticated. It's just so special. It's such a special moment. But I do think we have to talk about the best show on this tour.
go on.
We have to talk about Binghamton. I mean, this is the set. Obviously, I've heard this a bunch of times, Live Fish Volume 1, but there's the flow that they get into in the second set. I don't know if I've heard anything like it ever. I mean, it's just so absolutely perfect. And this Haley's, if it's not my favorite jam of the tour, it's 2 or 3. Like, this is unbelievable the way they play with dynamics in this jam. It's so relentless. It's scary. It's incredible. It's dramatic. It's pounding. And the way it careens into NICU is like when they used to play NICU in 95, like there was something so creepy about it and so unsettling in a way that I kind of miss. I don't think they tap into that as much anymore when they play that song, but it's so perfect here. And then you have that solo from Paige that's so beautiful, and then it goes into Slave, and it's just like top form scenery chewing Slave, like just absolutely perfect. I think this set, it's magic.
Well, they do this. They as Evie Dude said, going back into the Haley's lick in NICU is maybe my favorite Fish moment ever. Like, yes, this is not the most exploratory stuff, but this is like on a dime. Can we connect and can we play with dynamics, and like what can we do in this moment with this like idea that we have here? It's just it's played so fast, but also patiently. And there's this like musical communication back and forth with each other without any time wasted. It's just, here's the riff, we're going. Okay, now we're going to bring it down. Now we're going to bring it back up. Now we're going to bring it down. Now we're going to a new song. Now we're going to bring back that jam. Like, it's just, oh my God. Oh my God.
This set is so good. It's insane. It's yes, I think it's definitely one of the best second sets they've ever played.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Can we give a shout out as well to short hair, big beard Trey? That is a look I would totally welcome back. Like,
that was so crazy how much he changed during that tour. It was so weird to see.
Like, think about how long his hair was in fall '94, and like that, like the like red hair just like hanging over his face is like the the way that we always like kind of see him in our heads. But like, this is like proper haircut, but gigantic cross coast tour dude. It's just the best. The beard is amazing.
What else do we have to say about this tour, guys? What else? What's another show we need to talk about, or if anyone's ready to deliver their final?
I think we could deliver, but I will just want to say, thinking about that Trey just sang Mitski this week, it's so, can you imagine like telling like mid-90s Trey that he's gonna sing like Mitski, like this like romantic indie singer that he's gonna like sing her song on stage. I think it's just like the full circle Trey thing is just hilarious. Like he's just obsessed with him. But that I do think that's just incredible to think about his journey as a musician. Think about who he was then and who he is now.
Yeah, his journey with his hair and his music,
Mhm.
both fascinating.
And his rise to like cultural acceptance. Like he's going to be like this elder statesman of musicianship in New York City in this like way that like is just fucking funny
Yeah,
and
ridiculous.
deserved.
Go ahead, Brian.
No, I was just going to agree with that. I was just going to shout out Evie Dude, who is shouting out the 12-8 95 Tweezer Kung Tweezer. Great point Meg made earlier of inserting songs like Kung and Catapult into set list to spice things up. But
Could have
also
done it
a
at
jam that
Mondegreen.
could have done it at Mondegreen. A Tweezer Kung Tweezer would have been very welcome at Mondegreen. Though also like this is a jam that does showcase the use of space to negate everything you guys said earlier in this episode. So
Fuck. I guess Catapult is kind of spacey. Damn it.
Well, you said it. I said it got like spacier toward the end. I think that's fair.
I said
yeah,
that. I
it's
said
all
in
true.
December it was spacey.
I'm one of the beautiful things about this brain is the bitterness that he holds on to and the grudges that tend to
Beautiful
be here,
bitter brain.
even for people that he loves. So
My God. All right. What's everybody's final take on this tour?
I mean, I think Brian should have the final say. So I'll go first. Is that okay, Brian?
I'm totally fine with that.
I mean, I think December 1995 is legendary for a reason. It's the last time Fish will be in its first incarnation. And I think that's really important. And I think you're totally right, Brian, that nothing that happens after this wouldn't have happened without this. And I don't just mean that in like an obvious way, but like what they were pursuing and the choices they made artistically determined where they went from here. And the fact that they were doing that while stepping onto the big stage for the first time, I think it's incredible. And this ability of the band to peak and also look toward the future is really the biggest takeaway I have from this whole entire series, is that this band stands apart from any other band. And it's why they're my favorite band in the whole world of all time, because they're always looking to evolve, even when they're playing at their absolute peak. And I think this is a moment of purity for them. And it's absolute peak of their powers. I don't know. Maybe I've convinced myself. I can't tell.
I think when you get to the end of the tour, especially the 12-14 show, I mean, the 12-14 show is undoubtedly like a peak Fish moment, and it was totally not planned, based on my opinion of listening. They're just at this telepathic moment where they're doing things they'd never done before. It's pretty incredible to hear. And it was like this whole entire tour that built up to, these December shows that are just like we've talked about, really incredible. Yeah, I don't know in the context of the whole career. Like, yeah, I mean, this is like you guys have both said enough. So I don't know what else to say. It's a great tour.
Really good. Solid.
Great tour. I mean,
I want to hear Brian's final takeaway.
I mean, I've scouted this throughout the episode, but I'll condense it all into what I wrote down. My thesis here is that this is what 12 years of work and dedication and friendship and belief in yourself looks like. Had Fish broken up after this tour, we'd still be talking about them to this day. It was so great that the band had to reinvent themselves to keep going. While they'll never fully sound this big and bombastic and confident and youthfully joyful again, reaching these heights has pushed Fish through their future great periods where everything connects and they sound like an 8-armed monster capable of curing disease through music. I'll also just point back, like my takeaway from Fall 97, and I think that this is a critical kind of point of comparison, is that Fall 97 is U2's Octoon Baby, Radiohead's Kid A, it's Sgt. Pepper's, it's Pet Sounds. It is when a band, Fall 97 is when a band has reached a point of perfection and has to change. And can they change? that's the big question. Is that possible? And they did it, and it was an incredibly successful thing. But you have to think about the Joshua Tree, OK Computer, Rubber Soul, Revolver, all the great Beach Boys songs and singles that came out of the early 1960s. For Dylan, it's that kind of like going electric versus the great protest songs that he wrote in the early 60s. That creation is perfect for a reason, and is what drew so many people into those bands. And this sound is what drew Fish into, or fans into being Fish fans. And I think that everything that they do, there is a little morsel of 1995 in there, of the fact that this band worked from nothing to play the most famous arena in the world on the biggest party night of the year. And I guess, the debate always then would come down to, is the reinvention more important than the initial peak? My view is that the initial peak is just slightly higher, but there's a reason why Fall 97 is kind of the default. I don't know what to listen to. Press play on 12/6/97.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said, Brian.
Yeah, Brian.
This, like Fall 95, this project was the peak of years of friendship and hard work and
Trust,
patience,
patience.
and many other things. So we've reached the end, but we're gonna
I'm so
hopefully
tired.
we're gonna talk about this project hopefully next week.
Yeah,
We will. We'll find a time.
If there are questions that any of you have that you'd like to have us answer, leave voicemails, because I think we could spend a good deal of next week responding to voicemails, but we have some questions kicking around our heads that we're going to ask of each other, and kind of just do a big reflection on what this overall project meant and what we think about Fish going forward. And next year we'll be ranking our 50 to 26 tours in Fish. No, I'm joking.
Oh my God, I just had like a heart attack. Yeah, if people have questions about the process and how we worked through this, I'd love to hear them. This has been a labor of love for sure. And I'm excited to reflect on it.
Yeah, same. Okay, and that's going to be our next episode. And then we're going to recap MSG. And then after that, we don't know what we're going to do, but we're going to do something. This is a good question for next week. Where
It's
would
going to
you
be
put summer?
Yeah, it's going to be. We're going to talk about that for sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Okay. Thank you guys so much for listening and watching throughout this series. It was only 25 episodes. It feels like it was 100, but
it feels like it was Fall 95.
Does feel like Fall 95. We started in September, but here we are. It's Binghamton. It's Binghamton set 2 right here.
We did it.
Where else would we want to be, guys? All right. We're going to see you all next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Peace out.